She promised there was no one else, but then I saw the truth in her eyes. If you want, I can give 5 more punchy variations perfect for YouTube shorts or video intros. Do you want me to do that? The first time I truly noticed her, it wasn't in a dramatic moment. It was ordinary, almost mundane. She was sitting in the corner of the cafe, the soft morning light spilling over her hair, and the way she tucked it behind her ear without thinking made the sunlight seem to linger longer there. She laughed at something small, the kind of laugh that's never loud but carries warmth enough to make the world feel gentler for a moment. I watched without realizing I was watching, feeling a quiet pull I couldn't yet name. She claimed there was no one else in her life, and I wanted to believe it. There was something in the way she spoke, calm, assured, yet lightly guarded, that made her seem untouchable, almost impossibly composed. But the subtleties betrayed her. A quick glance toward the door, a tiny pause before she replied to a message, the faint crease between her brows when she thought I wasn't looking. These small cracks hinted at a life hidden just beyond reach. Our first conversation was unremarkable on the surface, yet it left a mark. I remember her voice, warm and steady, brushing past my ears like a gentle current. When she handed me a folder across the table, our fingers brushed, just the tips, barely enough to notice, but enough to send a quiet shock up my arm. Her touch lingered in my mind long after, a subtle warmth that didn't belong in the mundanity of paperwork and coffee steam. I began to notice the little things. The faint scent of her perfume clinging to her scarf, floral and comforting, like a memory I didn't yet have. The way her hands moved as she gestured, graceful but deliberate, revealing a life lived thoughtfully. The soft cadence of her voice, rising and falling in small waves that made even ordinary words feel intimate. Every glance, every slight movement carried an unspoken weight, as if she existed fully in a space I wasn't meant to enter, yet somehow had stumbled into. The quiet tension between us was unspoken but palpable. There were moments when our eyes met, and I felt her observing me just as carefully. Her gaze lingered a fraction too long, a silent acknowledgement of our shared awareness. Yet she smiled and said nothing, hiding whatever stirred beneath the surface. Her smile was warm, inviting, yet there was a subtle reserve, a barrier I couldn't name, but could feel pressing against the edges of my awareness. By the time I left that cafe, the ordinary morning had transformed into something heavier, more fragile. There was a pull, subtle but insistent, and a question lingering in the quiet spaces between us. What did she mean when she said there was no one else? I couldn't yet answer it, but I knew this was only the beginning. In the most ordinary moments, the smallest touches, and the quiet glances, an unspoken connection was forming, slow, gentle, and full of possibilities. And I could already feel that my life was about to change, without either of us fully understanding how. After the first encounter, our interactions became subtly more frequent, though never forced. There was a rhythm to it, small coincidences that made it seem as though we were orbiting the same quiet space. She began to share fragments of her world, and I found myself doing the same, testing the waters of trust. The age difference, at first a vague backdrop, became part of the texture of our conversations. Her words carried the weight of experience, while mine offered the restless curiosity of someone still discovering the world. I noticed the way she listened, not just to the words, but to the silences between them. When I spoke of minor disappointments or fleeting joys, she tilted her head slightly, eyes soft, as if measuring the depth behind my tone. Sometimes her hand would brush mine lightly when she gestured, or she'd rest her fingers briefly on my arm. A gesture so casual, yet so grounding that I felt a strange steadiness in her presence. There was warmth in those touches, not urgent, not demanding, simply reassuring. Our lunches became quiet rituals. Sitting side by side at a small wooden table, the sunlight streaming in through the window, I began to notice the little details. The faint creases at the corners of her eyes when she laughed, the soft hum of her breath when she leaned closer to examine a document, the subtle scent of her perfume lingering in the air long after she'd left. She had a way of existing fully in the moment, and somehow, when I was near her, I did too. One afternoon, while sharing a story from my past, I caught her gaze lingering just a second too long. It wasn't the kind of look that declared love, nor was it flirtatious. It was quiet curiosity mixed with empathy, a recognition of someone's honesty and vulnerability. My chest tightened slightly, awareness sharpening. I realized I crave her attention in a way I hadn't anticipated. The touch of her hand as she adjusted the sleeve of my jacket sent a ripple of warmth up my arm, subtle enough that I could blame it on the room's temperature if I wanted, yet undeniable. Even casual, everyday interactions carried emotional weight. A shared smile across the office, a brief hand-over-hand gesture when passing a book, sitting close enough on a bench that our knees occasionally touched. All of these moments stitched a pattern of closeness. It was slow, almost imperceptible, yet every day built on the last, layering comfort with quiet tension. What fascinated me most was her balance, confidence laced with a hint of vulnerability. She spoke openly about small regrets or past disappointments, never overwhelming, never seeking pity, simply revealing herself piece by piece. And I responded in kind, allowing her into spaces I usually kept private. Each shared secret, each laugh, each brief touch was a gentle reminder that this was becoming more than coincidence. It was a connection worth noticing. By the end of Keynote 2, the audience feels the gentle pull of a slow-burning intimacy. The male narrator is emotionally anchored to her presence, noticing the subtlest gestures and the subtle tension of what if begins to grow. The story is no longer about curiosity alone. It's about a mutual, evolving closeness that hints at something deeper, waiting to be explored. Just when our closeness had begun to feel natural, subtle shifts began to ripple through the quiet rhythm we had established. She remained warm and attentive, yet there were moments that made me pause, tiny hesitations in her speech, brief distractions, the way her eyes sometimes drifted toward the phone in her bag or the corner of the room where someone had just passed. She still insisted there was no one else, but the weight behind her words felt different, less absolute. I noticed it, though I couldn't quite name it yet. It was during one ordinary afternoon that the tension first hit clearly. I saw the way she greeted an old acquaintance, someone I hadn't met, her posture subtly shifting, her voice taking on a lighter, almost effortless charm I had never heard when speaking with me. It wasn't flirtation, exactly, but it carried the trace of familiarity and intimacy. Her smile lingered a moment longer than necessary, her fingers brushing his shoulder with an ease that made my chest tighten unexpectedly. I told myself it was nothing, that her warmth was natural, but a small seed of doubt had been planted. I started noticing the details I had previously overlooked. The slight tremor in her voice when she mentioned future plans, the brief pause before replying to my messages, the way her laughter sometimes felt slightly distant, almost as if shared with someone invisible. Each observation, though subtle, chipped at the certainty I had felt in the early days of our connection. My mind wandered in quiet moments, imagining scenarios, possibilities, questions that I didn't dare ask aloud. Even as I wrestled with these feelings, she remained present in the ways I'd come to cherish. The gentle brush of her hand against mine when handing over a folder, the warmth of her presence during casual conversations, the softness of her gaze when she caught me watching her. But now, those gestures were tinged with an unspoken tension, their meanings suddenly more ambiguous. Every touch felt both reassuring and fragile, as if it might vanish the moment I blinked. There were also moments of private reflection that cut deeper. I found myself comparing the way she looked at me with how she had looked at that other person, replaying conversations in my mind, and wondering what truths lay behind her insistence that there was no one else. My heart thudded in a way I hadn't experienced before, equal parts longing, fear, and fascination. I realized that my attachment to her had grown, and with it, a fragile vulnerability had taken root. By the end of Keynote 3, the audience is drawn into the emotional tension. The male narrator's trust is tested, but the connection remains undeniable. The slow-burn romance now carries the delicate undercurrent of jealousy, doubt, and curiosity, the perfect stage for heartfelt confessions and the eventual reveal. The story deepens. Love is no longer just gentle closeness. It has become emotionally complex, tinged with the first shadow of conflict, keeping viewers fully invested in what will unfold. The tension that had been quietly building between us reached a turning point on a late afternoon, in the small, dimly lit corner of a cafe where we often met. The sunlight had softened to a golden hue, casting long shadows across the table, and for the first time, the world outside seemed to fade. The noise of chatter and clinking cups became distant, leaving only the weight of unspoken words between us. I found myself finally voicing the thoughts I had been holding back for weeks. How much her presence mattered, how every small gesture of hers had etched itself into my daily life. She listened quietly, her gaze steady yet vulnerable, and when I spoke of my fears, the uncertainty gnawing at me, she didn't interrupt or dismiss them. Instead, she leaned slightly closer, the subtle warmth of her shoulder brushing mine. That gentle contact sent a quiet pulse of reassurance through me, grounding me even as my mind raced with doubt. Then it was her turn. She spoke slowly, carefully, almost as if weighing each word before letting it escape. She confessed her fears about being misunderstood, about the judgment of others, about the possibility of causing pain. Her voice was soft, yet it carried a quiet strength, the kind that comes from experience and resilience. I noticed the way her fingers trembled slightly as she tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear, a gesture so human, so unguarded, that it made my chest tighten. We sat there, sharing pieces of ourselves that we had carefully guarded until now. Every pause, every fleeting glance, every small smile or subtle touch amplified the intensity of the moment. When our hands met on the table, it wasn't a casual brush. It was deliberate yet tender, a silent acknowledgement of the emotions we were exposing to each other. I could feel her pulse beneath her delicate skin, rhythmic and steady, and it made the world shrink to that single point of connection. There was a moment of vulnerability that neither of us broke with words. We simply existed together in that fragile space, where honesty met desire and longing mingled with fear. Her eyes, usually so composed, held a flicker of uncertainty that mirrored my own. I realized then that the no one else she had spoken of was not a lie. It was a statement of intent, a hope for clarity in a life complicated by circumstance, and yet her honesty now included the shadows she had tried to hide. By the time we left the cafe, the air between us had shifted. The confessions had created a fragile bridge of trust, a delicate understanding that what we were feeling was mutual, even if neither of us could fully name it yet. The tension remained, but it was no longer one-sided. It had transformed into a shared heartbeat, a quiet acknowledgement that our connection was deeper than casual friendship, yet still uncharted, full of possibilities and cautious hope. By the end of Keynote 4, the audience feels the emotional peak. The slow-burn tension has matured into vulnerability, honesty, and desire. The male narrator and the woman are no longer merely close. They're deeply entwined emotionally, their unspoken longing and subtle touches creating a rich tapestry of intimacy that keeps viewers captivated and eager for what comes next. The fragile trust we had built was tested one evening in a quiet, private moment that neither of us had planned. We were sitting on a worn, sunlit bench in the park, the air carrying the faint scent of blooming jasmine, and the city sounds were softened by distance. She had been unusually pensive all afternoon, her gaze distant, lips pressed into a line that suggested she was wrestling with something she hadn't yet found the courage to say. I noticed every detail, the subtle tension in her shoulders, the slight tremor in her hands as she sipped her tea, and the way her eyes kept flicking to the path ahead, as if expecting someone or something. My chest tightened with unease, a quiet knot of worry forming as I realized that the no one else she had insisted on might not tell the whole story. The slow-burn connection we had nurtured suddenly felt precarious, teetering on the edge of uncertainty. Finally, she exhaled softly and met my gaze, her eyes steady yet tinged with vulnerability. She admitted that there had been someone briefly in her life, a chapter that had ended before we met, a connection that had lingered only in memory and circumstance. Her voice was calm, sincere, and heavy with honesty. She emphasized that it was over, that her feelings for him were no longer present, but the confession was necessary because she trusted me and valued the bond we had begun to form. I listened, the words stirring a storm of emotions within me. Surprise, a flicker of jealousy, and relief all mingling. Yet beneath it all was a deeper understanding. She hadn't lied to me. Her earlier statement of no one else had been her truth at that moment, shaped by her intentions and the life she was ready to live. The revelation was not a betrayal, but a window into her humanity, her capacity for honesty, her fear of hurting me, and her careful navigation of complicated emotions. Our hands met, a deliberate and grounding touch. I felt the warmth of her skin beneath my palm, the steady beat of her pulse, and the subtle tremor in her fingers. It was a touch full of reassurance, a quiet promise that this moment of honesty did not push us apart but brought us closer in an unexpected way. Her gaze lingered on mine, soft and tentative, as if seeking permission to continue building the fragile bridge between us. The park around us faded in a background noise as we spoke in whispers, sharing fears, clarifying intentions, and slowly untangling the tension that the revelation had brought. She explained that her life was complicated, that her past had its shadows, but that the present, this connection we were forging, was what truly mattered to her. Every word, every pause, every careful gesture reinforced the sincerity of her confession. By the end of Keynote 5, the emotional conflict is resolved without drama or resentment. The audience feels a deep sense of relief and warmth, recognizing that trust and vulnerability can coexist with honesty about past complexities. The stage is now set for mutual understanding and the deepening of emotional intimacy, as both characters emerge stronger and more connected than before. After the revelation, there was a quiet shift in the space between us, a subtle, almost imperceptible change that carried more weight than words could express. It wasn't instant comfort or easy resolution. It was something far more delicate, a shared understanding that our connection was real, meaningful, and capable of enduring complexity. We approached each other with care now, aware of the fragility that honesty had introduced, but also aware of the depth it had unlocked. We began to navigate our time together with a newfound sensitivity. Small gestures took on more significance. The brush of her hand against mine when passing a book, the way our shoulders occasionally touched as we walked side by side, the warmth of her presence that seemed to settle over me like a soft blanket. These touches were not desperate or hurried. They were deliberate, patient, and comforting, each one reinforcing a bond built on trust and genuine care. I noticed how our conversations changed, too. We spoke more openly about our fears, our hopes, even the quiet moments that usually went unremarked. She would share thoughts that had previously remained private, her voice calm, but full of quiet emotion. I, in turn, offered pieces of myself I had kept hidden, trusting her with vulnerabilities I rarely exposed. In those moments, age and experience became a bridge rather than a divide. Her wisdom guiding the conversation, my perspective adding freshness, and together we found a rhythm that felt entirely our own. There were also moments of laughter, soft and spontaneous, that reminded me just how natural this closeness had become. Her smile, once a distant light I admired from afar, now met mine with warmth and familiarity. And yet, even in these lighter moments, there was tenderness, a subtle awareness in the way she lingered near me, the way her eyes held mine just a little longer than necessary, as if she were silently acknowledging the trust and connection we were building. Touch continued to play its gentle, grounding role. A hand lightly placed on my forearm during a pause in conversation, a fleeting brush of her fingers as she adjusted my jacket, a quiet squeeze when words alone weren't enough. Each contact reinforced the emotional intimacy we shared. I realized that these small gestures were not just physical. They were declarations of care, reassurance, and presence. They spoke of an emotional bond that had grown stronger precisely because we had weathered uncertainty together. By the end of Keynote 6, the audience senses the story moving into its warm resolution. The tension of doubt and revelation has transformed into a steady, mutual understanding. The male narrator and the woman are no longer just drawn to each other. They are emotionally anchored, their trust deepened, and their affection expressed in ways that are subtle, human, and profoundly satisfying. This chapter of their journey is about the quiet power of empathy, patience, and honesty, setting the stage for a final, heartfelt conclusion. By the time the final chapter of this quiet journey unfolded, the connection between us had grown into something steady, tangible, and deeply comforting. The tension of uncertainty, the subtle hesitations, and the shadows of past complications had given way to a calm intimacy, one built on patience, trust, and an honest recognition of each other's hearts. The age gap, once an unspoken consideration hovering at the edges of every interaction, now felt like a gentle undercurrent of wisdom and perspective, her calmness balancing my restlessness, her experience guiding our mutual understanding without ever diminishing my voice. We spent the afternoon in a small park tucked away from the bustle of the city. The air was crisp, carrying faint scents of autumn leaves and the lingering warmth of sunlight. She walked beside me, her steps careful but unhurried, as if she were savoring every moment. Our hands brushed occasionally, naturally, almost imperceptibly, until a gentle interlocking of fingers felt inevitable, a quiet gesture that spoke volumes without a single word. The warmth of her touch spread through me, grounding me in the certainty that we were both present, fully and sincerely. We paused on a worn wooden bench, the familiar place where so many of our conversations had deepened. She leaned slightly closer, resting her shoulder against mine, and I felt the subtle rhythm of her breathing, soft and steady. Her cheek brushed lightly against my arm, a touch so gentle that it could have been accidental. But I knew it was intentional, a quiet affirmation of closeness. In that silence, everything unspoken passed between us: trust, affection, and the comfort of being understood. Our conversations continued, but they were no longer tinged with hesitation or doubt. We spoke of small things, plans for the week, memories of childhood, books we loved, but each word was infused with the warmth of shared intimacy. When one of us laughed, the other's gaze lingered just a moment longer, savoring the sound and the feeling it carried. The subtle gestures, the adjustment of a sleeve, the brushing away of a stray hair, the quiet squeeze of hands, became our language of care, a tapestry of connection woven through touch, glance, and presence. By evening, as the golden light faded into soft twilight, we stood to leave. Our fingers remained intertwined, our steps slow, as if unwilling to break the delicate spell that had formed between us. A hug followed, gentle and lingering, her cheek resting softly against my chest, her arms draped lightly around me. The beat of her heart was steady and warm against mine, a rhythm that seemed to echo everything we had shared: the trust, the vulnerability, and the affection that had grown so naturally from the slow burn of our story. By the conclusion of Keynote 7, the audience feels a profound sense of closure. The romance is fully realized, not through grand gestures, but through quiet, human moments of trust, understanding, and emotional intimacy. The male narrator and the woman walk forward together, side by side, their connection grounded in authenticity and warmth. The story ends fully satisfied, leaving viewers with the gentle resonance of a love that is patient, respectful, and enduring, a romance that lingers in the heart long after the final frame.